Patsy Ramsey and her attorney, Patrick Burke, flew into Denver after a one-day visit to Washington, D.C. In a soft voice, Patsy explained that she went out of town for a checkup on her recovery from ovarian cancer.
I had an oncology appointment.
This is only the second time Patsy Ramsey has answered questions since the murder of her daughter. More than 11 weeks have passed. The public silence of Patsy and her husband has many wondering if they will ever talk about what happened in their house. Her attorney says it is possible.
Would you respect our privacy, please? Thank you.
After asking us to stop taping Patsy, Patrick Burke did answer a few questions. Among them, if the Ramseys will ever give police an in-depth interview. He says he believes it will eventually happen. But as he and Patsy walked off, he would not say what is delaying the interview, only that negotiations with Boulder police are ongoing. Before Patsy Ramsey left the airport, I asked her if there was anything she wanted to say to the public, because it's been nearly 3 months and we haven't heard much from either Patsy or her husband, John. It appeared as though she wanted to say something, and then her attorney interrupted and said, "No, we have no further comment."
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head.
Hello, Merry Christmas and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Have a look at this image. Most of us, most of the time, focus on that little fragment of Patsy's paintbrush, the section with the brush on it. Our eyes are inevitably drawn to the inside of that circle, and to some extent the inside of the paint tote or the paint tray. We might notice at a glance the rest of the tote, the fact that it's on a carpet, but what almost no one sees are the square edges of pictures to the left of the tote. Now let's pull back a little. Now we can see those pictures a little bit more clearly in this image. Let's go to one of Patsy's police interviews where they're discussing this. Demuth. Here is the wine cellar. Patsy. Oh, okay, it could have been. I don't know. Haney. Do you recognize what that is behind it there? Patsy. Yeah, that is a painting I did. Haney. Okay, pretty much the painting supplies, the materials were together. Patsy. Right, all together. So it's not only Patsy's painting supplies, but also a painting that Patsy did, and it's right there by the wine cellar. Thus far, we've dealt with a different dimension to John Ramsey via his father, and then we looked into a few less familiar details about Burke Ramsey. Now it's Patsy's turn. And in what way can we look at Patsy in a way that might be new, that might take us into new information? Now, although I think Patsy's cancer narrative is underrated and underreported, people spend far too little time looking into that and what impact that had on JonBenet and Burke and even on John, on the whole family. I think there's another narrative that reveals perhaps a deeper, truer portrait of Patsy than many out there know, even if you followed the case quite diligently. And we get a real sense of that from this Washington Post headline, Mother's Art Supplies Linked to Ramsey's Slaying. Have you ever thought about it that way? You know, that what we find right in the midst of the fabric of the crime scene, I mean the absolute center of the crime scene, are art supplies. And who do they belong to? Part of Patsy's art supplies is actually part of the murder weapon. And we get a real gritty sense of these art materials floating within the fabric of the crime scene from this description from Lawrence Schiller's Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. It describes a shoe imprint that was discovered in a powder-like substance next to where JonBenet's body had been lying. Inside the wine cellar, fibers, hair, and the pink Barbie nightgown were collected. Just outside the room, there were wooden shards near an artist's paint tray that also held part of a broken paintbrush. Several paintings, this is the part to highlight, one of which Patsy had done in Michigan, of flowers in a box on her porch, rope, string from a sled, and down the hall on a counter, a red pocket knife. So can you see behind the tote, those are some of Patsy's paintings. Did you know that Patsy painted? They are right outside the wine cellar, literally a few feet from JonBenet's body. How did Patsy's tote get so close to the ground zero of the crime scene? Who put it there? When? What does Patsy say about this vis-a-vis the housekeeper, whose fingerprints were found on that tote? Police also speculated that the duct tape found on JonBenet's mouth might have come from the backing of one of Patsy's paintings. And if you know art, and my family are certainly the artists in my family, you know that duct tape is definitely part of the construction of frames and some of what goes into things like oil paintings. From Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, Detective Byfield, for example, had found duct tape that looked similar to the tape found in the wine cellar on the back of 2 paintings, one of which hung in JonBenet's bedroom. The police would later learn that this tape had been placed on the frames by Better Light Photography Studio in 1993 and didn't match the tape Ramsey said he had ripped off JonBenet's mouth. But that is certainly one potential source for this kind of duct tape. Also, did you know when Patsy's sister Pam executed her one-person raid of the crime scene, of the many items Pam removed from the home was an oil painting? This is also from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Quote, "The day before, one of Patsy Ramsey's sisters had gone into the house with police permission, and the first thing mentioned here, taken out an oil painting." And then I also want to highlight this part, a pageant medal with a blue ribbon. Remember, we're talking about the military side to John Ramsey. Well, a medal is a kind of a badge of honor, and this was something that they also removed from the crime scene. To me, this demonstrates just how important pictures and paintings were to the Ramseys. If they were important to them, shouldn't we pay more attention to them as well? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I will be doing a really interesting analysis of the red heart drawn on JonBenet's left hand in the next episode. What I'll also be revealing pretty much for the first time is my theory on this case, and it's something that I think is going to surprise probably all of you. Meanwhile, thank you to those who bought the book Christmas Star. I see it's got 100 reviews. It's up to number 7 Amazon bestseller. And of the 3 recent reviews, I want to highlight this one from Wens Phillips. She writes, "This is my first book on the Ramsey case. It wasn't until I had the benefit of multiple in-depth videos from this channel that my curiosity and desire to know more came to light. This book was so easy to read, concise in connecting and illuminating the facts. Highly recommended." Thanks very much, Wens Phillips, for that. If you're interested in reading this book, I'll put a link to the audiobook, the paperback, and the Kindle version in the description. Again, just a reminder, I'll be covering that red heart drawn on JonBenet's left hand in the next episode, so look out for that. Meanwhile, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile on Christmas Day, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. And now let's really get stuck into the other side of Patsy, this other dimension to Patsy Ramsey. In July 2006, a month after her death, the Denver Post ran an unusual column on Patsy dealing with a side to Patsy that we seldom see or hear about. The article was titled, "Beach Painting by Patsy Ramsey Adds Another Layer of Mystery." Now, although the Post had no idea what they were actually driving at here, the title was very apt. Patsy Ramsey's painting of 2 small children on a beach begs for poignant interpretation, and isn't that what we're about to do right here? As you're about to see, when we go down just this rabbit hole, not only does it expose a completely different side to Patsy, but it suddenly alters the crime scene and brings into sharper focus the people in the Ramsey home in a myriad of ways. And now we're going to deal with 6 aspects that add another dimension to Patsy Ramsey. Number 1, how did Patsy's tote end up not only downstairs, but right in front of the wine cellar door? And so let's go to the police interrogation. Demuth, do you remember when you moved those items? Patsy, right, Linda did. I asked her to take them to the bedroom. That's a very strange answer. Basically saying that she didn't move the items, Linda did, and that she asked Linda to take them to a bedroom. Now, why on earth would Linda take the articles not only not to the bedroom, but and not only down to the basement, but to the wine cellar door? And you remember Patsy did implicate Linda when they asked Patsy, who is your suspect? Who do you think committed this crime? She said Linda, and she also said that Linda Hoffman-Pugh had asked Patsy for a loan, something like just before Christmas. And so here, in a way, she's re-implicating, or seems to be re-implicating Linda Hoffman-Pugh. DeMuth goes on to say, do you remember when she did that? Patsy says, well, she did it prior to the party on the 23rd because we wanted to hang coats. Then further on, DeMuth asks, do you know where she moved them to? Patsy says, down here in the basement, I think, kind of like this sort of in this area. Now, we don't know exactly where she's pointing to. DeMuth says, okay. Haney says, well, there is I think maybe a quick little look at the tray with some brushes in it. We'll look at that in a minute. In that tray of brushes, what would you have had in there? Skipping further along, Patsy talks about signing up for a class. Now, think about how Burke and JonBenet, I think, were going for sailing lessons, and JonBenet was being coached in rock climbing. Well, what is Patsy doing? She's signing up for painting lessons. And she says here, where you could use both. I think that's a reference to oil and acrylic. And she says, I started out using oil and it got over my car, so I switched to acrylic, but there was a mishmash in there. She's talking about the kinds of paints in the tote. Haney, okay, out of the brushes you would have had in there, would you have had any that were broken or damaged? And then she interrupts him, no, they were all pretty new. Haney, okay, so any broken or damaged ones? Patsy, throw it away. But Linda said Patsy told her to take the tote down on the 23rd, not prior to the 23rd. Once again, we get another version of events from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Quote, Patsy started to take painting class and JonBenet drew a lot with crayons and markers. So it's both of them painting together, drawing together, being creative together. People and flowers. They had a big easel, but most of the time JonBenet painted on a card table in the butler's kitchen. Patsy had her paints and brushes in a white paint tote. Sometimes she asked me to take her paints down to the basement when she was having some kind of party. That's what she'd say about everything, any kind of clutter. Just take it down to the basement. I don't want to see it. That's quite an interesting statement in itself, given the situation in this crime. On the day of the Ramseys' Christmas party, I took the paint tote downstairs. Number 2, who got paintings for Christmas in 1996? By the way, did you know that paintings comprised some of the Christmas presents in the Ramsey Christmas of 1996? Did you know that? Or did any of you get paintings for Christmas? It is quite an unusual gift, wouldn't you say? I think the fact that Patsy gave John a painting during the fateful Christmas of 1996 tells you just to what extent Patsy thought painting was a big deal, and to what extent she must have felt John would have appreciated that as well. Now, it's also interesting that the arch Ramsey apologist Lou Smith specifically asked John about the painting as well. And so let's go to that interview. Did you get a painting for Christmas? John Ramsey. Yeah, that's right. Lou Smith. Tell me about that. Now, again, the painting narrative is quite important because it's a potential source for a very crucial item of evidence, the duct tape over JonBenet's mouth. John Ramsey. It was a painting of some boats at anchor that Patsy had seen in, I think, a local art store. Now, again, this is a reinforcement of John's connection to sailing, which he often undermines. He often minimizes when he gives interviews. He says it's irrelevant. And yet Patsy, who knows John, gives him a painting of boats at anchor. It was done by a local Boulder artist, John said. And then she had got me that for Christmas, which we were going to take up to our cottage in Michigan. So that also gives an indication of just how important the subject matter is, that this painting is going to be taken up to Michigan and displayed there in the sort of context of boats and all the rest. And so he goes on to say, it was behind the couch, I think. Lou Smith, yeah, I was just wondering. Now, there seems to be some confusion regarding whether Patsy painted John's painting herself or whether she bought it. John, I believe, said that Patsy bought it, and Patsy says, unless I've misunderstood, that she painted it, or perhaps it was a different painting, and gave it to John. It's also not clear if the painting, which was expressly given to John to take to Michigan, was packed up for that purpose. John said that he went to the airport on Christmas Day for several hours. Just think about that as well. You've got this family, and of all the things that they can do, John apparently says he goes to the airport for several hours. while the family are at home. And he said that part of the reason for this was to load gifts into the plane. Was this painting one of those gifts? And did the police ever check that painting for the duct tape at the back of it? But John doesn't seem to mention this particular painting. I mean, in terms of loading stuff into the airplane. Number 3, JonBenet also drew her mother a picture and gave it to Patsy for Christmas. Did you know that this was JonBenet's gift to her mother, JonBenet's Christmas present to Mom? It was a picture. Patsy: JonBenet gave me a little thing she made at school. I haven't been able to find it yet. I hope to find it. It was a little thing that said, "The best Christmas present is me." And there was a little picture of her on it. Now, again, can you see just how much value Patsy places in a picture? And we know that at the end of the Netflix docuseries, John shows pictures that JonBenet drew, and these are obviously of huge sentimental value to him. Haney: that is something that they made at school. Okay, was it for you and John, or Patsy? She gave it to me. Haney: okay. Patsy: she had one also, I think, for John. Now, it's interesting. I was at a Christmas lunch today where there's a big group of people, and there's a little girl sitting all on her own, drawing on a very sort of low table, drawing with crayons. And it did really make me think of JonBenet. She was a similar age. Number 4, Burke's picture of the family provides a glimpse into his mind. So you can also take this art narrative and extend it beyond JonBenet to Burke as well. Now, I want you to have a look at the second half of this comment. Burke said he cried and sobbed when his sister died. He cared, etc. Not as much as he could have, but he cared. Now, Burke's art came up during his first ever interview in January 8th, 1997. I do think art has a very unique way of showing not only what the artist thinks, but also to some extent the person who likes the art or wants the art or has the art. You know, what they are preoccupied with, what their inner world involves. And we see with Patsy giving John the sailing gift, that tells you what she knows is a passion of his. So in the same way, you can tell something about Burke, I think, through this picture. And the timing of it is so important. Burke's art came up during his first ever interview on January 8th, 1997. Barely 2 weeks after JonBenet's death and just a week after her funeral, Burke drew a picture of his family without JonBenet. This surprised Dr. Suzanne Bernard and others, and I have to say, Burke is often defended as being very young and small, but on this issue, he has apparently developed the maturity to move on after his sister's death, words he actually uses in the interview, saying something along the lines of, "I want to move on with my life," surprisingly quickly. I mean, even JonBenet's own father was walking around with a picture in his wallet and showing it in interviews, yet 9-year-old Burke has moved on.
So the first person you would draw would be who?
Oh, I got one.
Okay.
Did you consciously not draw JonBenet?
I don't really remember what was going through my head, but she was gone, so I didn't draw her.
Now, I do think you can make all sorts of excuses for a 9-year-old boy not drawing something in a picture. But when confronted about this picture on Dr. Phil 20 years later, rather than hedging, rather than apologizing, rather than even feeling guilty about it, mature Burke doubled down, almost gleefully smiling. He sort of shrugged it off, saying, "She was gone, so I didn't draw her." Many people found this disturbing, including me, and of course, this wasn't an isolated moment. Burke smiling inappropriately, almost his entire interview on Dr. Phil seemed weird. But what provides the initial hint at is something strange going on here is this picture that Burke draws. Now, if you know the finer details around the Ramsey case, you also know that after Schiller questioned Burke and asked him if he had any questions, Burke's only question was how much Schiller's Rolex cost. And then B, during the drive to the White's residence on the day after Christmas, the only thing Burke apparently said was, "Are we still going to Charlevoix?" On December 29th, just 3 days after JonBenet's death, at JonBenet's memorial service at the Episcopal Church in Boulder, among a sea of weeping mourners, one person seemed to be smiling. He seemed to be curiously unaffected by the events that were affecting everyone else. That and Burke's peek at Schiller drinking from his soda suggests to me an unusually materialistic kid, although that's not unusual. For kids from wealthy families to be spoiled. Now, I know we are sort of moving a little bit away from Patsy's story, but I do think it's interesting what the sort of source material to this idea of did Burke care is, and that is a drawing that Burke draws that doesn't include his sister. In an article from USA Today talking about the case of JonBenet Ramsey from CBS, the article notes, while being evaluated at the Child Advocacy Center, JonBenet's older brother Burke got angry when the interviewer drank from his soft drink can. So the makers of the CBS series seem to take this very seriously, this particular moment, Burke's anger at someone drinking from his soda. And the way I understand it, they extrapolated that to Burke becoming angry with JonBenet for taking a piece of his pineapple. I don't agree with their scenario, and CBS was sued for using that scenario, but I do think Burke's temperament is worth looking into, and that drawing way back in January 1997 that Burke did for Dr. Bernard was perhaps the first clue into Burke's psychology, his true feelings towards his beauty queen sister, whatever they were. Number 5, JonBenet bonded with her mother over art. So just imagine this. While Patsy's painting with an easel near the kitchen in the butler's pantry area, little JonBenet would curl up next to a table with her crayons and draw and paint as well. When Patsy had cancer, she painted in John Andrew's room, which was sunnier, and right opposite JonBenet's bedroom. It was something JonBenet seemed to do with her mother, while Burke was busy with other things. And that brings us to number 6, the final point. Have we underestimated the creative element? And I've got to say, this is speculative. This is just my opinion. And I could very well be projecting here because I'm quite interested in art and artists myself. But perhaps that also helps one to understand another artist. Because if we take Patsy's artistic side, her creative streak, and we apply it to the unknown ransom note writer, what happens? Does it work? Does it not work? Because either we have a greedy, money-grubbing pedophile abductor. He goes to the house, he wants money, he's got some other things on his mind. And then in the middle of that, he has a bunch of movies on his mind in the middle of committing a crime, which he commits to paper. Or there's something strangely elegant about the Ramsey ransom note. What do I mean by that? Well, think about constructing a picture or artwork. Think about that idea. Drawing something and being creative, and the same kind of mechanism, the same creativity, except now you're going to construct a note with a particular strategy in mind. Think about you want to write a note so that it looks like you didn't write it. And would an artist be more capable of that than someone who's not an artist? And it's not just the handwriting, not just making squiggles. I know there's a letter D and other letters that are very contorted and look very, very strange. And they're certainly inconsistent, these funny looking letters. But there are also other disguises which, if Patsy did write it, if Patsy did write the ransom note, she did a good job in fooling a lot of people. And then there's this other really fascinating aspect, not just disguising the handwriting, but also disguising the psychology of the note by using words from other sources, movies. That's also very clever and very creative, if that is what Patsy did. So is there any reinforcement to the idea that the Ramseys and not some intruder watched a lot of movies? Well, 180 videotapes were hauled away in box after box, 180 videotapes. And we are going to be dealing with that narrative, the videos, the photos, the photographic narrative in a separate analysis. If I don't get to that, remind me. But just think of that number. Do you have 180 videotapes in your home? And perhaps not videotapes, but movies. Suppose we don't actually need that anymore now that we've got streaming. But that is a very substantial library, and those were seized from the home. And I think movies were a big part of someone's attention span. And when Patsy was bedridden with cancer and she wasn't painting or resting, what was she likely doing? Interesting to think about, right? I'm not going to take it further than that, but just a reminder that we are going to cover this really tricky content, the red heart drawn on the left palm of JonBenet. And this is where the art narrative gets even more interesting. Is that something that JonBenet would have done? Is there some other artist that we haven't thought about? Who drew that red heart and what does it mean? I'll be revealing that and my theory in the next episode. Oh, one more thing before I go. On Patreon, there's bonus content dealing with a famous Dutch artist who is my great-grandfather. So if you're interested in that kind of additional insight into me and my background, head to Patreon. Also, if you're impatient for the next analysis, the scripts to a lot of these videos get posted to Patreon many hours before they appear on YouTube. So if you'd like to get like an advanced preview to my analysis, that's where you want to go, patreon.com/TCRS. Thank you for listening. If you don't normally listen this far, thank you very much for listening. If you are celebrating Christmas, I hope you're having a wonderful Christmas, and I'll see you guys next time.